slavery, the original sin of slavery, including by looking at reparations. And if I'm president, then I'm going to appoint a commission or task force to determine the best way to do that.
Why not support reparations then?
Well, what do you mean by reparations?
By reparations for slave defendants.
I know, but what does that mean exactly?
Money.
Well, I think that right now our job is to address the crises facing the American people and our communities. And I think there are better ways to do that than just writing out a check.
But we have a history of racism in America.
So you are for some type of
Yes, I am.
reparation? Okay.
Yes, I am.
5 years after Ta-Nehisi Coates' seminal article in The Atlantic, The Case for Reparations, and nearly 20 years after the publication of Randall Robinson's landmark book, The Debt, What America Owes to Blacks, the question of reparations for slavery is suddenly back in the news. Joining me now to discuss why that might be is Congresswoman Shiela Jackson Lee of Texas. She's the lead sponsor of H.R. 40, the longtime bill seeking a national study on reparations. And Mark Thompson, host of Make It Plain on Sirius XM. And Mark is soon to be a member of the National African American Reparations Commission. Thank you guys both for being here. And Mark, I'm going to come to you on this first
pleasure.
because, you know, I interviewed Randall Robinson many years ago, back when this was a really hot button issue back in the sort of early 2000s. And then Ta-Nehisi Coates made it an issue again with his piece 5 years ago. What made it come back now?
Well, I think that obviously with the introduction of H.R. 40 again by Congresswoman Lee, which has been out there, I believe, since 1987, the discussion has not gone away. There are organizations still active about reparations. They don't get a lot of attention in the mainstream media, like the commission you just mentioned, NARC, and also in COBRA, which is having, I think it's 30th annual convention in Detroit this summer. So the discussion is happening, but also, you know, there's some nefarious behavior going on. Just like we saw in 2016, where certain trolls, certain interests outside of the black community that may even appear to be black, like to take an issue, exploit it, and inject it into the presidential race. And that's one of the things we're concerned about now. There are some people who are pushing the issue, but they have an ulterior motive. And if I could explain, whenever you see people online refer to reparations and they only hold Democratic candidates accountable, and then they say if Democratic candidates don't support reparations, then black voters should stay home in 2020. That's how you know those people aren't genuine representatives of the reparations movement. And we saw that type of exploitation in 2016. We want to make sure that our community this go around is not subjected to sort of what is really a cyber COINTELPRO, where an issue in our community is infiltrated and exploited and used against us. And it's time now more than ever. The organizations like NCOBRA and the National African American Reparations Commission, Joy, speak out to say these are the real and genuine positions on reparations, not what some are saying where they say, well, we don't believe in Pan-Africanism, which is blasphemous to the reparations community. This is 100 years since the first Pan-African Congress held by W.B. Du Bois, when they say that only those who are descendants of slaves in America matter. First of all, many in the black activist and black intellectual community don't even say slaves anymore. We say enslaved people because we embrace the glory of our ancestry.
Right.
That's a giveaway when you see that type of rhetoric. And then lastly, when people exclusively talk about immediate cash payouts. If a Democratic candidate doesn't support immediate cash payouts, don't support them. Well, in COBRA, the National African American Reparations Commission have been saying it's not even just about that. It's about entrepreneurial development. It's about access to capital. It's about healing, much like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa.
Yeah.
So when you see those other types of things, that's a red flag. And we ask people to support and hear and get behind the legitimate, long-standing reparations organizations.
Yeah, and then just to sort of flesh out what that means in terms of the legislation that you are the lead sponsor of, Congresswoman, what is in that legislation and what would it do?
Well, first of all, good morning, Joy.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mark. And I want to take just a moment to connect with my brothers and sisters in New Zealand who suffered a violent, vicious, and terroristic act based on the question of racism and religious denunciation. So this discussion is long overdue as it relates to enslaved people and slaves in the United States. 4 million Africans were enslaved here in the United States. 1 million African Americans have been incarcerated across this nation. H.R. 40 was introduced on the very first day of the United States Congress in 2019. With an array of members coming from across the nation and all manner of backgrounds. They understand that it is long overdue for a national dialogue dealing with what happened to African Americans as slaves. This was an institutionalized and condoned action by the government from 1619 to 1865. De jure and de facto acts have shown the impact of slavery on African Americans. So the bill is not a check. The bill is, as those thoughtful Democratic presidential candidates have said, they have indicated that we have suffered because of racism. We know that the acts of racial white supremacist bias or acts have increased by 182% per the Anti-Defamation League. By the DOJ, Department of Justice, 58% of the incidents of bias were racial, ethnicity, and white supremacists in 2017. So we're asking for, the bill establishes a legitimate commission appointed by the President, the Speaker of the House, the leader of the Senate, and leaders like Dr. Ron Daniels. Of course, this bill was originally introduced by John Conyers and others who have been involved in the movement. Then it goes forward with an appropriations to be real, which is to bring in witnesses, to demand from the various federal agencies what has happened to the African American population. And let me be very clear. Yes, I want the push to be to support H.R. 40, to have a hearing, to move it in a process of reasoned understanding in the regular order of the United States Congress. But let me be very clear. Let us not label the black community, the African American community, as not being the geniuses that they are. The establishment of historically black colleges, astronauts, lawyers, doctors, and others. But we can see the loss of wealth. We can see maternal mortality. We can see the issues of health. All are connected. Does the nation not want to have a viable discussion and best practices and results that may involve HBCUs, and it may involve the restoration of wealth in some form or another? It may resolve in lower taxes that will impact all of America. Does the nation not want to have that kind of discussion? That is what H.R. 40 is all about.
Well, I wish we had more time to have that discussion here. We are out of time, but I know, Mark, on your Twitter feed, there's a lot of information about where people can get more information from